And well, it's the first one we're doing hybrid without hybrid, so that took us by surprise. So it's lovely to have Prof. Joy Owen with us here in person. The session has had a change of date 3 times. In doing so, we lost the original discussant, which was Dr. Luis Escobedo, who's traveling today. He said he may try and join us online, but I'm not sure if he will. Anyway, he helped us to find our new discussant, which is Lăcătuș-Iakab Bela Olimpiu. He allows us to call him Oli, which is a lot easier for us. He lives in Romania, and we're very grateful to have him as our discussant today. Dr. Tiffany Banda is a postdoctoral researcher in our center, and she's chairing the session today, and she'll introduce our speaker and discussant. So, Tiffany, I'm going to hand over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me online?
Yes.
All right. I'd like to welcome you again, as Fenella has, to today's Brown Bag Talk. And as she's already said, today we're privileged to have Professor Owen, who will be making a presentation titled Undisciplining the Native, Revelatory Reflection and Reflexivity. And just to say a few things about Professor Owen, she is an academic mother and head of anthropology department at the University of the Free State. The previous head of department and deputy dean of humanities at Rhodes University, Prof. Owen spent some time at the University of Münster in Germany as a visiting lecturer in 2016, and at Oxford University in the UK in 2019 as a Torch Global South visiting professor. Professor Owen's primary research lab is African transnational migration. Her monograph titled Congolese Social Networks Living on the Margin in Muizenberg, Cape Town, detailed the lives of transnational Congolese migrants resident in Muizenberg in the first decade of the 21st century. Joy's work hones in on the complex work in which African transnational migrants create and maintain belonging in post-apartheid South Africa. Focusing particularly on social network, Professor Owen demonstrates some congruency, strategy love, and habitus support onwards or not. A second research flirtation is embodied critical pedagogy that recognizes students as knowledge holders and producers through their experiences prior to and during higher education. Students are critical teaching and learning collaborators in classroom spaces, however defined. Just Joy, described by one of her supervisees as an invisible pioneer, merges both heart and head in her teaching, as she encourages students to become critically conscious of the world they have inherited and creating, and the ways in which all forms of oppression can be and need to be collectively addressed. Professor Owen's work, inclusive of her research, teaching, and administrative work, unobtrusively pulls apart academic and social binaries, making the world safer for the appreciation and celebration of differences, and the primary maker of humanity. And so Professor Owen is going to make her presentation, and following her 30-minute presentation will be a reflection by Oli. And just to say a few things about Oli, he is an ethnic Roma of Romanic nationality, currently a public servant and working at the Medical and Social Work Directorate in Cluj-Napoca municipality. He previously worked as a process manager at Pata Cluj project as a consultant for UNDP between 2012 and 2014, being responsible for community interventions in the area of Roma communities of Patarats, who live near the municipality's garbage dump. By profession, Oli is a social worker. He graduated from the Sociology and Social Work faculty and with his master's degree entitled Children and Childhood in Changing Societies, Multidisciplinary Approach in English at Babeș-Bolyai University. In October 2016, he was admitted to the Doctoral School of Sociology in the Institute of Doctoral Studies at Babeș-Bolyai University. His research topic is understanding parenting understanding parenting in Roma families who live in marginalized urban areas of Cluj-Napoca in the historical trauma contexts. And he will submit his doctoral thesis in September 2023, supervised by Professor Dr. Maria Roth. In the last 17 years of his working with vulnerable people in Roma community, in his last 17 years, he is working with vulnerable people in the Roma community in child protection and community empowerment at individual and collective level. And so without wasting much time, I would like to invite Professor Owen, who will be allocated minutes to make her presentation, and followed by Oli, who will be given 10 minutes. And after that, the floor will be open to the audience for questions and comments. And for those who are attending virtually, you could use the chat box to post your comments and questions, which will be read at the end. And also feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions to ask. And so, Professor Oli, your 30 minutes start now, and I'll give you a reminder, 10 minutes and 5 minutes.
I'm checking. Just to make sure that everybody can hear us online. Okay. Apologies for not putting myself on screen. It's maybe a good thing because the nerves can show, right? And why would I be nervous? Well, I've been trying to make sense of this work for a long time. And I think the process of trying to make sense of it started when I was actually in my first year at, almost said Rhodes, but at UCT in anthropology. So as an anthropologist, I have to say that, as an anthropologist, we tell stories, right? And so I don't want to do the discussion presentation that I put together for everybody because we get stuck in the language, we get stuck in the academicalese instead of the stories, okay? And a part of the work that I do in the classroom, but also I think in my research, which is now a distant memory, was to try and unpack through lived experience what it means to be a human being first, not an anthropologist, not a researcher, but a human being first, encountering other people, okay, in a space which was supposedly mine. So this was Muizenberg. I had grown up about 20 minutes away from there. So if anything, I knew the space like the back of my hand, right? And so I was native. In anthropological understanding across the decades, it wasn't appropriate to be native or to become native, okay? And why? I think we've been in disciplines for an extended period of time. We understand that people question your objectivity because there's supposedly a distinction between the subjective and the objective. And as a social scientist, you are supposed to be objective. Okay. Yet the primary tool of engagement and research and of life is the human being. So by virtue of just that fact, we are going to be subjective, and we will bring a number of ways of understanding, ways of seeing, ways of being. I don't like the word culture, and that's why I'm saying it like that. To any kind of engagement, whether that's in the classroom space or the research space. Okay, so that gives you a bit of a background to why I've been trying to make sense of this, because in the native anthropological tradition, I'm going to put it like that, you are not supposed to go native, okay? Because native is the opposite of white and predominantly male, okay? So all the power dynamics that exist within the construction of race, construction of gender, construction of any other kind of social category sits within the process of research. Okay, and I think predominantly so when you are from South Africa. I cannot speak for the African continent. I cannot speak for other continents. So I'm speaking specifically from my position as a South African. Okay, race is a part of our lives. It still is. It was. It is. It probably will continue to be. And how do we make sense of that? How do we pull it apart so that people who are supposedly different in terms of race actually start to understand each other? So I'm going to give you an example because it's the storytelling, right? So first year anthropology, first classroom, I'm sitting at the back. And this white man walks in, Afrikaner, veldskoene, jeans, hair tied back. And the first sentence out of his mouth is, race is a social construct. And for a moment I went, what? Right, at 18, we on the cusp of a new South Africa, a democratic South Africa. Here's a white man telling me race does not exist. It was strange because my understanding was that race was created by white people, right? So as a person of color, coming from a home where my mom would say, you know who you are colored. I don't know what that meant, but okay. She felt I knew what that meant. I understood that I was racialized in a particular way, right? And I also had to live that reality. So group areas act different, group areas, different schools, etc., etc. So can you imagine so many years later, so that was 1993, we're now in 2022. So many years later, I'm still in the discipline and I'm still trying to make sense of what is this, right? Because how do people who define themselves as Black and as colored in the South African space find themselves, situate themselves, write themselves into a white world of being, doing, thinking, researching, expressing? How do they do that? Okay. So the photograph in front of you is a three-dimensional, layered, in my head, dimensional, even though it's flat, okay, representation of the female line, the immediate line. So on your right, that's me. I had a moment in Namibia where I took a selfie before selfies were really the in thing. And I thought, oh, this is so weird, but that makes me look like an anthropologist. The hat, right? You're going out to explore, discover, all of those words, right? In the middle is my mom, probably in her 30s at that point. And I put her there because I am where I am because of her. Had she not put me down and said, watch people, I would not be where I am now. Because a part of the anthropological research endeavor is to watch, observe, engage, right? And then on the left is my gran. So here specifically, I pay a particular attention to my maternal line, okay? And specifically my granny, because it was strange, okay? It was strange to experience her in the final few years of her life as my grandmother, and yet have my mother say, your gran is offspring of a German man and a St. Helena woman, okay? So when we're trying to understand the colored, how exactly do we explain it? Because there's mixed and there's colored, and we can go into that kind of conversation if you want to, okay? So I put that there to give you a sense of what the lineage looks like. And that's how far back I knew the lineage, right? So that's the embodied lineage. Here's the intellectual lineage. So the next photograph is Malinowski amongst the Trobriand Islanders. It's that very famous text, The Argonauts of the Western Pacific, right, written in 1922, where he makes it abundantly clear that participant observation means that you need to be in situ. You need to be in the field with people in order to understand. And he used questionable phrasing, which I think at the time and in and of the time was particular, right? So using native, using savage. And when you explore that text, you come up against a number of other kinds of presentations. White people, colored people. And so the world he is in is not completely savage, actually. Right? And we don't always know who the actual savages are. Yet when we read the text, with a particular kind of understanding of race, we will assume that the savages he refers to all the time are the people he worked with, the people he studied, those who were non-white, as if non-white exists. Yeah. So even reading 100 years later, you get the sense of what the reference was, who he was actually working with. But when you switch your mind a little and you come to understand that here we actually had a modern space, we had a cosmopolitan space. He was in a space where there were other people of different origins, and they were interacting with each other. And on some level, while he positioned it as if they were on the margins, they were not. He could engage. The people he was studying could engage, right? So why would we construct the field in such a way that there was no commingling, no interaction? And why wouldn't we unpack that even in 1922? Okay. The next one, and my maternal great-grandparents, Garrett and Johanna Farenfort. So they are my mother's parents. Okay. And for a long time, that photograph stood in our lounge. And I could not understand why there was a white man in a photograph, right? Because how do we actually identify race? Really? Through phenotype, right? We do it all the time. We look at each other and we make assumptions about racial categorization. And one would hope that it stops there, but it doesn't. There are connotations, there are social connotations that are attached to race, yeah? So for a very long time, I could not understand what this white man was doing there. And then my mom kind of explained, you know, that's your great-great-great-grandfather. It's like, okay. And then a year ago, I had a very strange dream. And this might sound weird, but dreams are indicative of another existence, right? And we do things in our dreams that we can't do on the material plane. And I think in some ways the metaverse is probably trying to push that and trying to replicate it, yeah? But we dream. And I don't know about you, I dream in color and sound, but I never hear the person talking. I hear the person talking in me. Does that make sense? So I hear the sound as if it's in my body. Okay, and there's always so much happening. But this one dream bugged me. I found myself in what seemed to be the terrain of the Swiss Alps. Okay, and we were going to go up onto, I don't know who I was with, but it was a we. We were going to go up the mountain. And there are all these people at the bottom, and all of a sudden I have a very green, flowy dress. And I'm being lifted off my feet. And I feel jubilant. I actually feel happy, relaxed. And I went, what? When I woke up, right? What was that? But that started something. Okay. Up until this point, when we think of decolonization, we're always talking about white European context. We talk about the canon, which has to be unpacked. We never use the word destroyed, but the implication is that, yeah. Then there are other people who will say, we need to bring everybody to the table and we need to have these very diverse voices talking to each other, right? So it becomes a pluriversal expression, a pluriversal expression of self. Because if you really pay attention, then you start to understand that you're not just one thing. You are multiple. And how does that multiple teach? How does that multiple do research. And if you're going to say that you are not multiple, I would encourage you to go and dig deeper, because this is what's been happening, okay? So on the left, maternal great-grandparents. On the right, there's my grandmother and my grandfather, okay? According to legend, my grandfather's lineage comes from Java, okay? So one of the islands in Indonesia, one of the Indonesian islands. And I kind of go, well, he's got to wait, because I'm trying to make sense of the white line. Why? Why? Because in the discussion around decolonization at the moment, right, those who are uncomfortable with binaries, like myself, cannot find an easy entry point into the conversation. It's difficult, because all the time you have to indicate your politics. And if you don't indicate your politics, it's assumed, your politics is assumed based on what you look like. Right? So when I say to people, and it gets them a bit riled, when I say to people, I am not colored, I'm human, first and foremost, they go, what does that mean? As if that statement is not political. As if that statement doesn't have value, right? So previously, supposedly, because I was native, because I am colored, I'm excluded from writing the canon. I'm written about. I'm studied. Now in 2022, I can study. I can write, but I'm still on the margins because I'm not Black. Whatever Black is, I'm still on the margins. So now I start giggling because I go, okay, this is really what's been frustrating me. If I sit within that thinking, within binary thinking, I must choose between this lineage. I must choose the ancestors that will take me forward. And I must choose to cast one of the line away. Okay. And on some level, I think over the past 10, 15, 20 years in academia, I've been doing that because I understood that whiteness embodied a particular way of being in the world, which was one of dominance, one of destruction, one of colonization. Okay. But we're creating the binary. There's no complexity in it. And on the same level, if I go to, there's the Black line, we were oppressed. Finished. We were murdered. Finished. We were raped. Finished. We were colonized. No complexity, because I keep working within the binary. And so it bugged me. I'm not comfortable working within the binary because I'm neither. I'm neither. Okay. So a few weeks ago when I was supposed to do this presentation, and I went to go and do autoethnographic fieldwork. That's where the dream led to. I went back home to try and find Lulu, to try and find my grandmother, to try and find the woman who gave up Christianity and her family to become Muslim, to go from Lydia to Latifa, Mata. I needed to see her. I needed to know her. Couldn't understand why. I just knew she was asking. Pay attention, right? And then I tried to have a conversation with my mother, and my mother's at the age where she can't actually do a full-on conversation. There's a little bit of Alzheimer's. You can't really say a little bit. Alzheimer's has crept in, yeah. And there are times when she doesn't want to remember things. So we went off to District 6. I thought that would jog her memory. And instead of talking to me, she said, you go. Go. And she observed me walking through the space, trying to make sense of it. I'd been there before with my mother, but I hadn't had that experience. Where all of a sudden the photographs spoke in a different way. And there was one particular photograph, I wish I had photographed it, of two men talking. And the one is kind of like, oh God, not another story. And the other one is full blown into the story, using his arms and his face and his body. And I went, oh my God, that's my family. That's us. We tell each other stories. And often the stories would be of violent recollections, not of loving recollections. And so I had to make sense of this, right? Why did we remember the violence of a particular kind of childhood, of people living together quite freely, different classes, different races, different nationalities, 60,000 souls completely removed, houses gone. My grandfather had died in a boxing ring, a boxer of note, sergeant in the army. And so my granny was left with 7 kids of her second marriage. And the little bit that I can put together is that the church stepped in. The Catholic Church, of all things, stepped in to keep them together. So she decided to leave my grandfather's family. And I think I have some idea as to why. So again, the memories, right? My mom's memories come. My mom would say, they made a slave of my mother, a white woman. Who did? His Muslim sisters. My mother had to wash in buckets of water. Okay? Those large kind of, what do we call it? We still see it now and again. Very large kind of, what is it? Tubs, ne? Tubs. And my mom would say, blue soap. And so she'd rub that soap on the sheets, hands, okay, moving it. And I can see the movement because I've seen my mother do it. I've seen my mother do washing. I've done it, right? So in the movements that I make, I start to see my mother and I start to see my grandmother. So I understand why in the 1940s, my granny decides that's it. As far as I know, she had no contact with her family. Now and again she did while my mom was growing up. But when they were walking into teenagehood, nothing. So something's lost in the story. Because again, it doesn't make sense. If this is a white woman, why is she being treated like a slave? This doesn't make sense, okay? So I have a conversation with my cousin, who's the younger cousin of my mother's twin sister. And the week after I come back, I don't know if you can see that, I try and find my great grandfather. And it's wonderful. I think if you put in names, there are certain links to be made. And I keep trying to say to my mom, but what's his name? And she says, it's Garrett. And I say, how do you spell it? And she says, Garret. And I go, what? And I keep searching. And I come home and I've been here for about 2 days and I'm frustrated and I'm using my phone and I'm going again far and forth. And all of a sudden I find this on Genie. And I have a look and I go, oh, holy, right? Sorry, I can't swear. But all of a sudden he's there. He's there. And I start trembling because I go, but I was supposed to find Gran. Right? And it's like, no, this is not going to make sense. And the next minute, there she is. And I know her birthday. And it's so strange because I needed to know that. Because my son, I'm strange like this. I think you guys know I'm strange by now. My son is a Cancerian, and I needed to know what my gran was because somehow I felt that there's a link between my son and my grandmother. A birthday? 5th of July. Makes her Cancerian. And so strangely, we try to make connections, right? The meaning we make of the world is dependent on our experience. It's dependent on our past. It's dependent on our present. It's dependent on our future. My son is the future. So I live with this now. All of a sudden, very in my face, very consciously, I live with past, present, future. And a few days later, when I'm standing at Landbouw, of all places, and I'm explaining this experience to a younger colleague, right? I say to her, all of a sudden, I can't choose between the lines because I know I cannot. I cannot. And I don't know what that means for the rest of my academic career, but I cannot choose between the two lines because there are stories within each line. And when I look at the information provided, my granny was a cigarette packer. I go, oh, I remember that story. I look a bit further. One of the great-great-great-grandfathers was a laborer, white, a laborer. And then I go, yeah, that's what was strange when I was in Germany and I saw a white man sweeping the streets. I went, what? Hi, woo, hi, something happened. I literally stopped. It felt strange. Because I was being shown that there's a different world beyond South Africa. There's a different world beyond the one we create through our interpretations of data. A different world to the one we analyze. So what exists for me? Fundamentally, I understand why now I would say I'm human. Because that moment in front of Landbouw, I saw all of them. And that sounds strange. I saw all of my ancestors. As I was explaining to my colleague, I said to her before, I couldn't see their faces. I didn't know how far they extended. But now I do. And instead of, and somebody would call it, if you're a Jungian analyst, you would call it active imagination, right? Before, there were two streams, two rivers, two lines, right and left. That day, they merged. Literally. They merged. And so what do they demand? Because neither is demanding significance. Neither. But they're demanding something. You will consistently speak of complexity. You will consistently hold on to the opposites. You will gather them and you will pull them together into your narrative, yes, which is one, but it will be multiplex. And what does that mean going forward in terms of my research? I will continue to look for the human being because I have been doing that. I just didn't have a psychological reason. Does that make sense? You always want to have an intellectual reason. But you get to a point where something else stirs because your life is not just the intellect, it's not just the mind. It is the body and it's the way it experiences and how it is experienced. And if you remove that, so people would call it navel gazing in anthropology. If you remove that, the work you produce is less than. So actually, you've got to talk about the dynamics, the very difficult dynamics. I mean, people ask you, but why are you positioning yourself in your paper? Why are you positioning yourself in your research? Because I am the primary tool of research. That's why. And because all research is relational. If it's ethnographic, it's relational. And you've got to write the relation and the relationship and the relating into your work, because that's the value of it. So at the end of this process, I realized, yes, this attempt to be a white male ethnographer, however subtly, was never going to work for me. It was one part of the line. Trying to write as if I was oppressed, my line was oppressed, and because of it, I'm angry and I'm taking on the canon and I'm going to pull it apart. I'm going to be critical, plus the anger, right? Doesn't work for me either. Because where I want to go, where I want the world to go, is not back. It's forward. And for me, that forward entails holding the opposites. Yeah? So I end off with this. Last night, my son says to me, I always put him in because we started saying, I'm an academic mother. So at 5, my son is having a problem with school at the moment. I don't know what it is, but he just does not want to go to school. So he starts again this morning. I'm not going. I'm not going. And I had to remind him, but remember last night when you said, I'm not going, I said to you, Jordan, remember, you have a very diverse group of ancestors who loved, who built, who expressed, who sang, who danced, who were angry. They were diverse. And so they enter a space before you enter it. And then there are those who have your back. In some strange way, my 5-year-old understood this. And he nodded and he smiled and he said, okay, Mom, he forgot that this morning. But last night, he was willing. Why? Because I'm now starting to tell him, you have ancestors. Okay? I'll leave it there.
Owen, for such a thought-provoking presentation. Got me thinking about so many other things. I started thinking about whether I know who my ancestors are as well. Without wasting much time, I'll call upon Oli to give your thoughts about it. You have 10 minutes. So Oli, over to you.
Thank you, Joy, for your profound story. Like I said from the beginning that I'm very, very nervous. Why? Is because I resonate a lot with your story and reading your abstract. Why? Because in my presentation, I said at the beginning that I'm a Roma ethnicity, a Romanian citizen. What does that mean is that Roma is the worst thing that could happen in Romania and in Europe. When you say, a lot of people using the word gypsy, which means a negative thing about the people, but in Romani language, Roma, it means human being, man, and that's why I resonate a lot. I would like to apologize if I'm bubbling in English. I'm not native speaking English. I also resonate a lot with your title, Undisciplined and Native. You know, when I saw the title, it was very, very interesting, and I was laughing because during our history as a Roma in Europe, there was a German professor who was considered the founder of the, let's say, the modern gypsy research. and he published a thesis about the gypsies as being pre-civilized people and savages, which needed to be civilized. And as you can see the similarities, that undisciplined, we were savages, which we were needed to be civilized. These are very hard things that marks our, let's say, ancestors and us as human beings. I totally agree with you about the definition of the race. I also agree that the power why people created this word race, and the reason I think is that they wanted to make this separation between human and not human, which created conflicts between us as human beings. I found a lot myself in your story, and it's really hard for me right now to see you and feel I feel your anger and frustration, because I feel like we are people who are in search for something that was taken from us or hidden from us. The legacy of our family, we need to find it, and I think this personal and political it is needed. Why? Because personal, I think we have the moral duty to search and to put it on the paper, everything that we want to show that it is injustice, and to show that this injustice affects us as human beings. And political, because otherwise, if you are not doing political also, I think is that you cannot change the policies that, let's say, that stop us to be equal with others. And also, I think doing this, we help us to fight and to show to our children that the world has to be an equal one and a better one for our children. Reading a lot about the colored, for me, it was like, it's not possible to put a name for human beings like gypsy, like colored, because with this, let's say, names, you are born with an etiquette which equals to the injustice, to the how to say it, stereotypes and prejudices against people of color. This name given to you and people like you, I think it had a buffer effect on the identity, which is affected a lot your experience, the events and the effects they are needed to be, let's say, healed they need to be taught, and they need to be assumed by, let's say, non-colored, black or white people from South Africa. I think it's very important to respect the history of the victims of different events experienced, like the slavery, the Holocaust as oppression. If is, of course, in Europe, if I speak about the Roma, I can say is that not, or a lot of people don't know about this history, and I think the reason is that, like you said in your abstract, and I love it a lot, that the historical pen, it was not in our hands. A lot of researchers and academics are not related to the Roma, are not speaking the reality and the truth about what is going on and what is happening with us, that we are suffering, and we need to be considered equal and also human beings.
Ollie, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, I think as a conclusion for me, hearing you, is that is not the knowledge that we are lacking. What I think is that we are missing the courage to connect and to reflect, and also to act against injustice and inequality. I think we need to act in order for us to transform all the structures from the society, and to know our roots. Otherwise, we are like, if you are not knowing our roots and what is happening with us, it's like being a tree without leaves. Thank you again for the presentation, and I think further on, the people, doesn't matter the color or the ethnicity, should be considered human beings and equal people. And thank you for this, and good luck with your research.
Thank you very much, Ollie, for the thoughtful reflections. We'll now open the floor to audience to give their comments and questions. And for those of you attending via online, you're free to type in your questions or comments. I'll be checking the chat section for any of those, but for now, we'll open the floor to the audience. We have about 10 minutes because Professor Owen has a meeting at 1.
I'm just giving them a heads up saying I'll be late.
Okay. All right, so we'll... Any comments, questions?
I have to put my glasses on.
Hi, can I mention something? It's Margriet de Villiers here from Stellenbosch University.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. You can hear me well enough?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Just wanted to mention this as a comment from my side as well in terms of relationality, and so interesting, Joy. I could so much relate from where I am as well with my background being a white Afrikaans raised woman. That quite interesting also when you chose, or you mentioned specifically the maternal lineage, and how important for many of us that maternal lineage is, and where we define ourselves or how we define ourselves now. as women, wherever we find ourselves. Because I remember as a young girl already, my dad of all people would say, when things were tough, and this let me think of your son Jordan, he would say, just remember that you come from a very strong line of tough, the men always said hardkoppig in Afrikaans, which means you're hard-headed women. And when you struggle or when things are tough, you have their genes flowing through you and their strength flowing through you. And that's always been something that's very comforting to me. But then also knowing that these are women who had the political strength as well on their side already as white/German persons in South Africa. So that term of strength means something totally different, and how that can mean something totally different, and yet the message of pride, of holding on to the story of who you are, where you come from, whatever that may mean, and that it's also not as clear cut always. I just wanted to share. I don't think I'm expressing myself very clearly, but I hope you can hear what I'm trying to convey.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that comment. I'll call upon Melanie. Very much. Thank you very much, Joy. That was really, really interesting, and I thought very, very brave as well. In some ways, it slightly reminded me of Sylvia Vollenhoven's recent, I don't know how recent it is, but I read it recently, and there was some sort of resonances with that. So that was really amazing. I'm going to ask questions around autoethnography rather than comment on the specifics of the story. And I'm not an autoethnographer, and I don't have particular expertise. But I do have a number of questions, so I thought I'd ask them all, and then you can choose which, if any, that you want to respond to. So the first one that came to mind listening to you is autoethnography a tool or a methodology which should only or primarily be in the hands of people who have been or who are oppressed, marginalized, and excluded? And the other side of that question is, if we don't do that, is it potentially a dangerous methodology for the dominant, who could end up colonizing spaces all over again? Or should all stories be told and heard because you don't like that binary? So that's the one sort of set of comments. The second one is there any normative dimension to autoethnography? Should or shouldn't there be? Is it something that, I mean, Ollie was talking a lot about social justice. So I guess in his approach, autoethnography would have a strong normative dimension because it would be tied closely to social justice. And I think maybe that's there in what you're saying as well. Sort of related to that, but not quite, is does autoethnography need explicit theoretical anchors, or is that just going to mess it up? Do you just leave it to run implicitly, sort of threaded through the story that you're telling? And then the last one is, are there any boundaries or limits to doing ethnography, to writing ethnography, to being an autoethnographer? And I asked that because just in the last week or so, I was reading about this controversy about a PhD student at Manchester University. I don't know if you picked it up, who had a paper published in Qualitative Inquiry, which then generated a lot of controversy, I suppose, around his particular autoethnographic account, which in his case had been to keep a diary
over a period of 3 months of himself masturbating to images of adolescent boys, so sort of kind of graphic pornography, and to turn this into an autoethnographic account. And the article has subsequently been withdrawn from the journal. So for you, would that be also ethnography going in the wrong direction, or in fact, would that be something which you would regard as within the boundaries? So it's kind of a set of thoughts which I've tried to turn into questions, coming out of what I think was an extremely interesting presentation. So thank you. Answer one, answer none.
But in some ways it does, and I think probably, if Tiffany you'll allow me, I actually think all those questions are interleading, you know, and if I think about it, I mean, what do we mean? And so I speak specifically from anthropology. What do we mean by autoethnography? So when I think about my PhD work, I put myself in there, yes, but it wasn't autoethnography. It wasn't about me. It was about the relations with Congolese men and women, with South African men and women, and trying to make sense of what it means to be a transnational African migrant in Cape Town at the start of the 21st century. What did that mean? Okay, but I couldn't separate myself from the work, right? So I had to write myself into it. This extra part, which now feels like autoethnography, really speaks to everything that has come prior to this moment. And so that exploration is really about how have I come to know? I know how I've come to know in my discipline. I know that lineage. But what about the embodied lineage? There's value there. There's knowledge there. And when I say, for example, just off the cuff, you know, my son is bone from my bone. He's bone of my bone. And that what I know sits in my bones. When I say that, I'm saying something. I'm articulating something that I need to hear. And it's an attempt, probably in many ways, to bring those knowledges together instead of saying one is more significant than the other. In the process, I think, and this touches on the Manchester paper, I'll call it that, is that there's a particular kind of ethics that is created, one that is not top-down, one that is collaborative and created. And so you start to then ask questions of, wait, hang on, can you call that autoethnographic? And can you say that is field work? Because there's a virtual space involved there. Do those individuals know that they are being seen and observed? So you start to ask those questions that come out from an understanding that you can be the oppressor and the oppressed, and that you can be in the midst of those two on this continuum at any given time. And so you have to start asking those questions. So for me, it was not just about, here's an ethical code of conduct, which is provided by Anthropology Southern Africa or American Anthropological Association. The ethic has to come from me. And what is that understanding about? It's about sensitivity. And it's about recognizing that you do not do harm. That's the primary principle. But in what way? In what way? Okay. So I think when we talk about the normative dimensions also, again, it's dependent on who you are, that those stories are going to come, and those stories frame a particular kind of analytical process. So depending on what you choose to tell, that will inform your theory. And for us as anthropologists, yes, we're aware of theory, but we like to say the theory, the explanation, the analysis comes from the data. And if we say that, we have to recognize that that means that we are part of our data. Because the question you choose, how you choose to unpack it, who you choose to research, etc., starts with you. So for me, you know, the process was always this is the one and the same. It's moving through me as I'm trying to make sense of it. And I'm trying to grasp and hold on to particular kinds of things which makes these analyses possible. But it's not only the intellectual stuff. And so their scholars' work on sensual scholarship becomes a part of that. So it's not just the mind, it's your entire body that's a part of this process. And it has meaning, the meaning you give it and the meaning others give it. And you can't avoid that. So I'm trying, you know, in various ways to probably go, I don't really want to be an autoethnographer. I still don't feel comfortable with that. But I really want to talk about the relational work that happens when you're doing research. So this is probably a part of the story for me, not the end of the story.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other comments or questions? All right, if there are no comments or questions, I don't think there is anything in the chat. We have a few acknowledgements from the audience online for the presentation that they found interesting. And they're looking forward to more engagement. So because of time, I just want to thank you all for coming. And for those that joined online, thank you for being part of it. We hope to hear more about, you said it's part of the story, we hope to hear the end of it.
As long as I breathe, I'll write.
So thank you very much. And I think there's an announcement about the next brown bag, which will take place in October. And we look forward to all of you joining again. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you and take care.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you, Ali.
Much appreciated.
Me too. Thank you very much.